Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I've got David with me today, and we're going to be talking about the future of claims adjusting and maybe some of the things that we need to course correct to get to our ideal future. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to, Emma. And thank you for allowing me to be here with you today. My name is David Obert. I am Chief Product Officer for Verisk Property Estimating Solutions, otherwise known as Xactware. And we can't lose that name because a lot of people recognize the Xactware name even still. I've been in the industry for about 20 years, which is, man, boy, I was all of 11. Let's
I believe math. It. That sounds right.
But have been in the industry for quite some time now and have seen a lot of stuff happen, have seen a lot of innovations happen within the industry, and just happy to be a part of it. So excited to talk to you today.
Great. Well, I always like to start these conversations by kind of like setting the foundation for the rest of the discussion. And I teased that we're going to be talking about the ideal future of claims adjusting. So let's look 5 years into the future. What would the ideal claims adjusting experience look like?
You know, so Emma, I'm going to answer this question with a lot of confidence, because what I find is that confidence is key to predicting the future, because inevitably once the future comes around, you kind of look silly, right? And so we're going to go at it with a lot of confidence, and then I'll look silly later. That's okay. But from my perspective, something that I'm seeing a significant amount of investment in, a lot of interest around, is having a much more streamlined, automated claims process in the future. And there's a number of things that I think, at least from my perspective, I think that we're going to see lend itself to the industry as it relates to that automated processing and that automated workflow. And we've talked a lot about FNOL and straight through processing, and does straight through processing actually exist? And as I was kind of thinking about this, as I was kind of preparing for our conversation, I started thinking a little bit about the auto industry. Auto's a lot different than property in a lot of ways, and in some respects, auto's a little bit easier. If you think about a 2023 Toyota Camry, a door on a 2023 Toyota Camry is a door on a 2023 Toyota Camry. Doesn't matter if I own it or you own it, Emma, or one of your listeners owns it. It's not really relevant. It's still a 2023 Toyota Camry with a specific kind of door from the manufacturer. Property is a little bit different in that I might have a door on my house that is a hollow metal door, as an example, whereas my next door neighbor may have a solid oak door, and the neighbor next to them may have a hollow pine door. So there's all this weird nuance that we get in property, and it makes it a lot more difficult to have kind of that straight through processing, where I can just simply take a picture as an example and it just automatically feeds through, like we see in auto claims. And what's been fascinating about auto claims is there's a lot of ability to settle within minutes within auto. And I think we can use that on the property side as kind of a guide for how the future of property could look in the not so distant future. And so from my perspective, I think what we're going to find is we're going to find much more data that augments the way that we approach the claims process, so that we can get to a much closer to straight through processing workflow than what we currently experience today. And I think about it from a policyholder perspective and how a policyholder kind of interfaces with their insurance carrier as well. Where a policyholder, you know, they're on the phone, they're calling their insurance carrier because they had a flood, or what's worse, they may not even be in town when that flood happens. And so they don't know about it until they get home, and then they're calling their insurance carrier, telling them, I don't know what to do here. My basement flooded while I was on vacation. I need to have somebody come out and look at this and at least help us stop the flooding or remove the water or whatever that looks like. And it's a stressful process anyway. Like, you're in a stressful point of time as a policyholder. But beyond that, you're now having to interface with a bunch of different people in the industry, whether that's a mitigation contractor, the insurance adjuster on top of the carrier itself. I mean, there's a lot of people that you're interfacing with, and it just is a really, really stressful time. And I think what we'll find in the future is that we will find that Internet of Things is some IoT functionality is going to streamline a lot more of that. Think about a sensor in your refrigerator that knows if it's shut down, and it can actually send a notification to your phone that, hey, the freezer's thawing. You might want to take a look at that, or have somebody else take a look at that if, say, you're on vacation. But a lot of these new devices that are coming out and have been coming out over the course of the last few years now have a lot of these sensors built in to help acknowledge, or help the homeowner acknowledge that there's a problem. I mean, how many of us have Nest thermostats now? I know I do, and Emma, I don't know if you do.
We do, because we had an incident on vacation.
Did you really?
We had our air conditioner went out in the middle of the summer while we were on vacation, and we got a notification, but again, it wasn't during winter, so it wasn't like a send anybody out, but right. We have upped our sensor game since that incident, because we got home and there were things like, it was hot enough that there were things in our cabinets that were melted, and like chocolate bars that, like that kind of stuff, all candy or granola bars and that kind of thing. And so after that, we were like, ooh, yeah, what if this was something more than just the air conditioner going out? What if, because it was something that had tripped, like what if that trip had set fire to something and we didn't get any notification while we were gone, or you name all of the different things that can happen while you're not present. And I should have worn my t-shirt from Tim Dullahan. He has got his saying is, water sensors are the new smoke detectors to avoid non-weather related water loss. But I agree, like a lot. But so I think this kind of helps bridge us to the next piece of this conversation. So when we look at more data and more connectivity and all of these components coming together, do we have the ecosystem in place to be able to share all of this information across our systems to make, so beyond just like the Internet of Things for the policyholder, but do we then have the capability to take that data and turn it into something meaningful and like create this ecosystem that we need to have in place for this reality?
So I think the answer is clearly yes, and at the same time a resounding no. I think there are certainly capabilities, and we at Verisk obviously have a lot of that flows through our systems. But even from our perspective, we have a massive ecosystem play that we're pushing right now to recognize that there are individual companies out there, and companies, not just companies that are doing portions and pieces of the claims workflow, but also there are disconnected individuals that are out there as well. If you think about a TPA versus an IA versus a staff rep versus, I mean, there's all of these personas that exist in the market that we're trying to join together and help create a streamlined path of communication and information. But we're even doing stuff on the predictive side where I think trying to notify carriers beforehand so that they can let the downstream chain know and prepare for losses. I think about our weather data, right? We certainly know when a hurricane's going to hit, as an example. That's a pretty easy one to figure out, right? A hurricane's barreling down, pardon the pun, but barreling down and about to hit Florida. We recognize and know that there's a pathway. We know more or less what the risk factors are and what properties are going to be impacted by that storm. But there are nuances beyond that. And if you think about a fire claim for a second, so you mentioned, if your box had tripped and perhaps sparked a fire or something like that, what's the first thing that a person does when they see a fire in their kitchen, as an example, Emma?
Panic. No.
Well, there's that. There's definitely that. We panic. Yes, we do.
Hopefully trying to put the fire out if it's safe, or getting out of the home if it has grown too large, and then calling 911. Absolutely.
And then calling 911. And if you think about that, these dispatch centers when you call 911, they have a lot of information, because when I call 911, I call them up and I say, hey, I've got a fire in my kitchen. It was my stove that caught fire. It was a grease fire. It got all over. My cabinets are on fire, and it's starting to burn down my kitchen. I need the fire department out here ASAP. There's a lot of information that's communicated to those 911 responders and their dispatch centers. We are partnering and have been partnering with companies that are actually aggregating that data so that we can provide that in the future to insurance carriers so that they know about the fire even before the policyholder is calling up anything. They know that a fire is happening at 123 Main Street and are prepared for it. Or a hail event, right? If you think about hail that goes through the Midwest, and I mean, there's been, a few years back, and I guess it's been a lot of years back now, but there were those massive hailstorms that came through the Dallas-Fort Worth area, hit some of Austin. But we can start predicting and start providing detail far before. Here's your exposure. Here's the type of damage that you can expect, and even to some degree, here's what your risk cost is associated with the portfolio of properties that you have under your policies. Like there's a new level of predictive analytics that you can do. But if you start there and start trying to bridge that gap of information and data from the carrier down and then from the policyholder back up, you create this elevator of data, is how I'll refer to it. And at each layer of the value chain, you can start dropping off that data. And so at the policyholder, here's some information for you, policyholder. I go up a level. Independent adjuster, here's some information for you. I go up a level. Contractor, here's some information for you. And everybody has the right data at the right time, exactly when they need it. And I think that is what we're trying to create in our ecosystem across the insurance value chain. But this is difficult. This is something that's very, very hard. And requires everybody to kind of buy into this concept. And we at Verisk have certainly been trying to help not only the individual personas in the industry that are doing the work and are taking part of that, but we're also working with our third-party providers, so ecosystem providers that provide data and or provide functionality and help bring that all into one single source of truth so that everybody kind of is singing off the same sheet of music. And that really is kind of one of our objectives as we work with our carrier partners and the individual folks within the industry.
And I think that's such an interesting point too. I think about that scenario of calling 911, whether it be because of a fire or something like, and I use this example all the time, like if I have my kids in the backseat of my car and I get into a car accident, it doesn't matter that I am like peak millennial who is digitally native. I want to call someone and I want them to be able to tell me it's going to be okay. Right. But at the same time, my patience for having to repeat myself or, like waste time with going back and giving people the same information time and time again as I'm being transferred or calling different parties that are a part of that process, you're fried from that experience that happened to you. We are at the point where technology should be doing some of that for us. And so, but to your point, it's not always easy to get the collaboration that's necessarily needed and get the buy-in and that vision at every stage or every floor that elevator is going up and down on. And I think that kind of takes us to this third and final question, especially when we look at like the carrier side of this equation and sharing and collecting data and all of this process. It's all kind of driving towards the same goal of being able to use technology to predict and prevent and get us to that point. But how often are you seeing in practice the stereotypical like glacier speed of adoption and governance getting in the way of us actually being able to make these things a reality?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think governance will make or break our ability to augment the human being in the insurance industry. I think that whether it's the Department of Insurance, whether it's our own regulatory requirements within the industry itself, whatever those self-imposed, whatever those things are, I think that is going to make or break our ability to streamline this. I will say I have a lot of faith. Certainly on the auto side, there's a number of automations that have been created, a lot of AI type functionality, Gen AI even, to identify damage from a policyholder taking pictures as an example, where it will flow straight through. But I will say all of those continue to be viewed cautiously and carefully by many in the industry, because anytime you automate, you also introduce potentials for errors, right? We all hear about, Gen AI as an example. We hear about a lot of hallucinations that happen with generative AI. And the reality is that is real. I had one today. I was actually using, we're going to be releasing some of our AI functionality, and we had a hallucination that popped up, and it was like, whoa, where are you coming up with that? That's some crazy information there. That's not even remotely close to what I asked you. But we have to jump back in. We have to train, retrain, and the less human touch that you have on claims and the way that claims are done, the more I think you're going to have regulatory requirements around how those are done, and a requirement around a review by a human being to make sure that the machine isn't just making up stuff, and especially when it comes to payouts and things of that nature. You're going to have to have an individual validate and reassess to make sure that the machine is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Certainly can help with 80%, but that 20% is going to be fundamental, I think, in the future. And I think it's going to be required through regulatory requirements. And there are governance boards. Each insurance carrier has its own, governance board related to automation and AI, and I think that is for its own protection. I think it makes sense. We've certainly had opportunities to sit down with many carriers at this point and talk through some of our coming soon AI functionalities, and to help augment the claim rep and or contractor. And it's been fascinating to have those discussions, because they're very excited about what the future can bring, but they're also very cautiously optimistic on how are they going to implement it, and how can they do it in a measured fashion and with a measured approach, because everybody wants to be careful when it comes to that type of functionality.
And I think that there is definitely a reason, back to what you were saying, for us to be cautious and build protections in place and make sure that we have the right ethical guidelines surrounding when and where we're using it. And, I'm always the first to say, just because we can doesn't mean we always should. Right. And like drawing those types of like boundaries for the industry and or individual companies. But there's no putting the genie back in the bottle at this point.
Certainly not.
I think both at an individual level and an organizational level, the best thing that we can possibly do is to stay incredibly curious, continue to learn alongside the evolution of technology, and figure out what those boundaries are. Because if we never try, then we never find out those boundaries, or we far extend them and we end up in a place that none of us want to be. Right. And so I think that, like, again, your point to finding that right balance of the 80-20 of what we can augment and what needs to stay uniquely human is the battle that we've got for probably the next number of years.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for the conversation. And if you're not already, make sure that you follow David as well as Verisk on LinkedIn, and join in conversations like this moving forward. But thank you again for your time, and for everybody for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Emma.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.